If you are serious of building voice AI assistants inside of Vapi, it is incredibly crucial that you don't just limit your knowledge to the dashboard, but you actually understand the whole documentation, because that is where all of the magic lays. Now, don't get me wrong, the Vapi dashboard is great. We use it on a regular basis to build out the prompts and test things, but if it comes to nuancing or fine-tuning your assistant in many different ways, it is super important to understand the documentation, because it contains so many features that would be virtually impossible for Vapi to just add them into the dashboard, because it would overbloat this whole thing. And especially for beginners, they would suffer the most, because for them it would be incredibly hard to find their way through the dashboard because of all of those features. Now, what they intend as a feature or as a benefit, because it makes it easier for people to get started, it is still harder on the other side, because it removes one specific part from the equation that I believe is really important, which is being informed of a feature. Now, yes, Vapi has a changelog or some releases that they announce inside of the Discord community, but getting notified about features is still not as straightforward, which means that you obviously have to go through the documentation. Now, in today's video, I hope I can shortcut this for many of you, because I'm going to show you 5 of the features that you will not find inside of the dashboard, but which we literally leverage on a daily basis inside of our agencies to make our assistants incredibly good. Now, if you are a beginner and you literally just work inside of the dashboard, or you maybe haven't even created an assistant yet, this video might not be right for you, because you should already understand what an assistant is, what maybe a transient-based assistant is. If you're not even sure about that, I'm going to link a video up here that you can watch, which exactly explains all of the details on how to get started with Vapi, what it actually is, how the whole infrastructure works, etc. You will find tons of videos about that on my channel as well, so I'd recommend you just going through those first. But for the people that are still here and watching and are interested in making more out of their voice assistants, this video is going to be for you, because it contains features that you definitely want to leverage, especially if you sell your services, or obviously if you're a business owner and you want to implement this into your business. It is also super crucial, because it will just increase the quality of your phone calls, which is obviously incredibly important, because this is the reason why you obviously automate this thing in the first place, to get you a good outcome or to get you value. Now, to make you the start even simpler and not just bombard you with the documentation, I've created a Postman collection that you will get access to directly inside of my resource hub. Now, if you've never heard of Postman, it is basically a platform that allows you to test requests and API, specifically API requests or webhooks. And the reason I'm using is, which is also the reason why we are going to use the documentation in the first place, because we are interacting with Vapi via the API and not via the dashboard, which is mainly the reason why you don't find those things in the dashboard in the first place. Now, this Postman collection I'm going to give you has basically a lot of those features predefined, so you can literally just replace your API key and your Vapi assistant ID, and you can already start use them right out of the box. There are a couple that are more advanced, but we are going to come to them very soon as well. To get access to this Postman collection, simply head over to my resource hub under hub.enigradicus.com. You will get the URLs there. You can just head over, copy this whole thing for your own Postman account, and just try it out. Maybe even follow me along on the screen while you test it, which is probably the best case, because this is the way how you can learn and actually understand it in the most efficient way. But for the ones who are only watching, or if you just want to do this stuff later, let's just dive right into it with the first feature, which we obviously find inside of the documentation. Now, the documentation should probably be familiar in one way or the other. You should probably know how to navigate yourself. Main 2 points that you want to look into is the documentation and the API reference. We kind of usually switch between both. In my case now, I'm going to the API reference, because the first feature we are going to look in is fast turns. Now, fast turns is a feature that allows you basically to use a different LLM model for the first couple of turns until a certain number is reached, which then switches automatically to a more sophisticated model. And the reason we do this is, especially in high volume calls, we usually tend to optimize for pricing in a certain way. So by using a cheaper model in the beginning for messages that just cover things like, hey, how are you, etc., maybe even redirecting a call to a different squad member, in those cases it makes a lot of sense to use a cheaper model, because it doesn't need all of the reasoning in the backend. Now, it is hard to show you because Vapi doesn't visually display it, but let me just guide you through an example. Let's, for example, say we have an assistant. I'm going to say, hello, how are you? And the assistant answers something. For the first message, it's probably not going to be an important one where it needs to do any kind of tool calls. So in those cases, we often use those fast turns to limit it to a cheaper model like GPT 3.5 to just generate a response faster that we can just send out to the user to make the first interaction more fluent. Now, to find this feature, you basically head into the documentation of Vapi, you head over to the Create Assistant or maybe Update Assistant. That really depends on your needs. We're going to use Update Assistant because this is the one I also use inside of my Postman collection. And right here in the Assistant, if we go down here to Model, we open that part, and we open here the OpenAI, for example. In the OpenAI section, if we scroll a little bit more, you can see here num fast turns, which is exactly this value that you can set to a certain number. Now, it's an integer, meaning that if I set this to 1, it will use for one turn, meaning one turn in the conversation. So when you speak something, the AI says something. For the first response, it uses the cheaper model if you set this to 1. And then in the second response, it would use the normal and more sophisticated version that you have actually set up directly inside of the LLM. If you set this thing to 2, it would basically use twice the GPT 3.5 and would then switch to your more sophisticated model. I guess that makes sense. Now, getting this thing ready inside of your assistant is a bit more complex because you would basically need to add it inside of the assistant. If you don't want that, Vapi now also implemented a nice feature where you can already pre-create this JSON for you, so that you literally just need to copy it and need to do a couple of adjustments. The way this works is you click here on the play button, it will open this, this testing setup where you can basically add your API key and you can add the assistant ID that you would like to update, which is great because if you use Vapi, you can directly update things inside of this dashboard. Unfortunately, it doesn't work all the time because there are some features that are just not implemented visually, but you need to set them. But that's a thing for a whole nother video. But what we do now is you can basically set up your ID here if you want to try it. And then you select from the body parameters, the model. Inside of the model, we go here and click on any scale. We're going to select OpenAI. Then in OpenAI, we select our normal model, which is the model that we would usually like to use. So you can set this to 4 Turbo, 4 Mini, whatever suits your needs. And then if you open here to the optional properties, you will see num fast turns. We're going to set this and we can set it here to 1, which means the first turn is going to be with GPT 3.5 in the case of OpenAI. Now, as you can see, the good thing here is it basically creates this payload for you. So if you want to test it properly, what you would do is you would just copy that. You would head over to Postman. You would open a new request setup. And the good thing about Postman is you can just paste curl statements into the URL field and they will be automatically applied. So I'll just do this. You'll see, boom, now it's set to patch. We have the body in here. It's all set up as JSON. Perfect. We are ready to go. The only thing you would need to do is you would need to head to authorization and you would need to add your bearer token for Vapi. Or if Vapi is not a choice because you have it on a different setup, you can literally just use the bearer token setup and add your token right here. Now, in order to try it, all you would do is you would add your assistant ID and your API key like mentioned. You would press here on send and you would see as a response your assistant that you basically use to update it. And you will also see inside of the model the updated num fast turns, which is not available inside of the dashboard here under the model section. Now, unfortunately, this is public, so I cannot put in my own keys, otherwise I would show you. But because it's public, you can fetch it as well, which obviously is a good thing. So one downside for you, one downside for me, I guess you get the point. Now, the next feature I'm going to show you is already something I covered in a separate video on my YouTube channel, which is called keyword boosting. To give you a short explanation of it, simply imagine that inside of the transcriber, you can define keywords and you can give them a certain value. And then the transcriber basically tries to match those keywords based on certain words that appear during transcription so that you can ensure that some words are interpreted in the proper way. I have back then shown that in the case of a branding name, where I've mentioned Easleben, and Easleben has been mostly every single time written wrong during the assistant. And keyword boosting basically solved that problem because this boosted keyword managed to find similar words that are similar to the word that I'm basically looking for, and it converted them to the actual words based on the value that I set after boosting this keyword. Now, this whole setup can also be in the negative, meaning you can also set a different value for it, so you can basically suppress certain words, but which is nothing I need to cover today because that's already covered in depth in the other video. But it's a feature that is not available inside of the dashboard, even though it is super crucial. Now, it is part of the transcriber, and as you can see here, you can only set deepgram, the language, you can set the model, and that's kind of it. So provider, language model. But if we head now into the documentation right here, and we go to update assistant again, let me just close this window. We actually go through this whole setup over here. Now, if I close this whole model part, and now I head into the transcriber, and I'm going to open deepgram, you can see if we scroll down here, you'll see that there's a point called keywords. And these keywords are also explained in the documentation here, which I don't think is the best, but it helps you already to get started. So if you scroll down here to customization, you will find under custom keywords another manual that explains this whole setup a little bit better, where it also tells you how you can add those keywords. And as you can see here, you can add a value behind it, separated by double points, which then basically assign that value to it and say how intensely it should look for that keyword and try to match it to the actual words that you have inside of your transcriber during transcription. Now, heading back to the documentation, there's not much documentation here because it just says keywords. So the best way again to try it is we probably just head over to the play button. Now I'm going to remove the model here. I click again at the transcriber. I switch to deepgram if you aren't there, and you select keywords. And now you see that visually you can even add items here. So if you want to have a keyword, let's for example say Jannis, like my name. If I write it into the assistant would usually pronounce it Jannis. And Jannis, as you can imagine, is often being interpreted as Janice, which looks like this. which obviously is not my name, but it sounds very similar. So the AI kind of thinks, oh yeah, it is Janis and not Janis. And to avoid this, what we can do, there are a couple of things. And the number one is obviously that we can just add a double point and a value to it. I usually like to set my name to 30 to 50, depending on the prompt that I'm using, because I noticed that Janis and Janis are so similar from the writing that the AI just often gets it wrong, which in the opposite side means that Janis, if it's actually in Janis, would also be interpreted as Janis. But this is something that usually depends on how you set it up, right? And if you say you're in the medical space and you have doctor names, it makes sense to add the last names of the doctors as keywords, and it's obviously the same thing for brand names or product names, etc. Now right here on the right side, you can now see that there is a JSON that also contains the provider and the keywords. Now it might not work straight out of the box, which is also the reason why I added it here. In that case, it is the same setup, so you don't need to add any extra fields for Vapi to update it, because in some cases, if you, for example, don't set the provider, which is also the case here, it will not work. If you don't set the provider, it will most likely throw you an error and say you need to set a provider, because some of those settings, like keyword boosting, is only available with Deepgram and not with the others. So they kind of like try to force you to set certain values during a patch, so basically during an assistant update, to make sure you already set the right stuff right from the beginning. Now, once you added your keywords and you push them, your assistant will automatically use them and prioritize them and basically replace the other words that are being transcribed. And to show you an example, I just opened up a log right here that we can just take as a reference, because in that case I added Janis to the transcriber, which you can see is represented here as well. Now in the first message, it's still written wrongly because it's a more statically generated message. It's always the same, so it's being cached. In that case, that is the reason why it still comes up here, because initially I tried it. So don't be confused if this is the same case for you. Now, the important part is from the user. If I say my name is Janis, in this case now, it properly interprets it because I defined it as a keyword and it is boosted. The problem is, and that is what you see now here in the next message, that the AI continues saying Janis. And the reason for that is because what we set right here is used in the transcriber, and the transcriber only works in the time you speak, and it is basically interpreted from your speech to actual text, but not the opposite way around. If the LLM now uses your name and it basically tries to say it back, because we already mentioned it earlier, like here for example, in the first message, it would still consider it Janis. For whatever reason, it is AI, it does its own thing. And to avoid this, there is another feature, which brings us now to the third hidden feature that I'm going to show you, how you can replace certain words inside of the transcript based on whatever the AI brings back to you or tries to say. Now, you might imagine that this is done on the LLM layer, which is not the case, because what we are using for that is the actual voice provider, which brings us back to our documentation. So let's head over to the Vapi documentation. And now we are going to look again inside of the update assistant, because it's all in here. But instead of looking in the transcriber or model, we are going into the voice section. And if we open voice, let's head into 11 Labs, because 11 Labs is the one that offers this awesome feature, which I think is also available for some of the others. But 11 Labs is the one that we mostly use with it, because obviously it has the most premium voices, which is also something we always want to give to our clients when we build out assistants. Once we open 11 Labs, it's now getting a little bit more complicated, because what we do is we go to the chunk plan, which is basically the chunks that the model sends through streaming. And we open the properties, and you can see here a couple of more settings. If we scroll down, you find a format plan, which is part of that. And in the format plan, you will find something called replacements. Now, it is very nested and very complex, which makes it very hard to see and find, and probably even leverage, because you need to go down quite a bit. And what that does is it actually takes either a fixed word, so a static word, and tries to replace it with a word of your choice during those chunks that are being transferred from 11 Labs, in that case, to your actually phone caller. So in the moment it is being transferred, they can be replaced. Or a better approach is using regular expressions, which is another option right here. And those regular expressions, again, allow you to basically replace the name more sophisticated if Janis is, for example, even written in a different way. So you can check for something like JA at the beginning and CE at the end, and then you can use everything that is in between of those words inside of that one chunk to generate a new word. Now, I have to mention, because it uses chunks, I know that's going to be a little bit more complex, but since it uses chunks, it basically always gives you blocks of text. And those blocks might be also that the words are cut right in the middle. In those cases, it is not possible for you to replace that word. But in the majority of cases, even in those chunks, it will properly make it, so that you can still get the right result at the end. Now, since this looks so complex, I'm going to run the play button, and I'm going to show you the whole setup as a JSON right here. So all we do is we open the playground right here, and we go here to the body parameters. I'm gonna select voice this time. Here, instead of AI voice, I'm basically selecting from Azure, instead of Azure 11 Labs. Now here, I'm going to select whatever voice. You need to define the voice. It's kind of a requirement, otherwise it starts crying as well. And there are a couple of other things you need to set, but I'm going to show you this in a minute. And now under the more optional properties, I'm gonna set chunk plan. We say more properties, I'm gonna set enabled. We need to set it to true, very important, otherwise it's not gonna work. Then we're going to select the format plan. Under the format plan, we select enabled again. We set this to true. Now we click again on replacements in the next field, and now we can add our replacements. Now when clicking on it, you can see that we can now say an exact match, which means it's a static word that we replace. So it's literally just a search replace. So let's say, for example, it says Janis, which is the case where we want to replace. We add Janis here, and we want to replace it by Janis. So as you can see here, now we have a whole JSON that is pretty nested, but contains all of the information we need. And these are the ones that we can now use to patch our assistant and feed this back into the visual assistant inside of the dashboard. Now you don't need to recreate this whole thing. I have also prepared this directly inside of the Postman collection that I created for you, which looks something like this. So if we look now into the voice setup right here, this is something I've tested. You basically have your voice, in that case it's set to 11 labs. You need to set your own voice ID, so in case you don't have your own voice ID set yet, it's something you need to add inside of the Vapi dashboard based on whatever voice you have. If you use a custom voice through 11 labs, make sure that the voice ID you add here is actually available inside of your 11 labs account and it is synchronized with Vapi. And the rest, you can just literally keep it the same. Now in this case, you can see Janis is going to be replaced by Janis. And to show you that this works, I also have another example for you prepared that I did in a previous call. Now you remember the example I showed you with a transcript earlier? Now this is another call that I did right after I fixed that, basically with the replacements of those keywords based on a static word. And you can see that Janis has been interpreted properly by deepgram. So we basically gave the keyword a certain value and it replaced Janis properly with Janis. And now you can see that the AI does the same thing because it initially probably interpreted it as Janis again, which I've now then automatically replaced as a static string with Janis. This is a simple way and a great way on how you can improve the quality of the assistants. And this is also incredibly crucial if you do phonemic matching, meaning that you want to adjust a brand name, for example, the way it is pronounced or spoken, and not just the way it's written. Because if you deal with voice assistants like Easy Living, you can also write it in a better way so that it sounds more like your actual brand name, so it represents your brand better. And you can match that with both of those hidden settings that I just showed you now. First, using the transcriber to match the word, and then using the replacements to get the word back, so that you have consistent quality of that word during the whole conversation. Now the next feature I'm going to show you is already dedicated towards squads. If you don't know what squads are, quick explanation again. Squads is basically a voice assistant that contains multiple voice assistants within it. So you have kind of like a team of voice assistants that can hand over that call during the call to its other sub-assistants. This is super cool and extremely powerful as it allows us to build massive kind of like thought trees and assistants with a specific purpose to leverage only a set of features that needs to be accessible only by that assistant. This makes not just the conversation better and more smooth, it also reduces the price, because as you can imagine, we don't need to stuff all of the information inside of a single system prompt. We can just spread that out to separate sub-assistants and connect them together. Now, the way that is called squad, you can imagine it's like a team, so you have multiple assistants inside of a single JSON construct, which is something you can read more about inside of the documentation. If you just search for squads, that's what I usually do. This is just the easiest setup. Under squads, you can see introduction, and they will explain you everything on how it works. Or if you stay a little bit more patient, I'm going to show you a full tutorial on how squads work and how you can leverage them inside of your business. Now, for the ones that are already familiar with them, this one is perfect for you, and you will love this one, I can promise you, because it has been a game changer for us as well. The feature I'm going to talk about is called member overrides. Now, if you've been part of my channel for a while, you have most likely heard of assistant overrides, probably as well if you have already built assistants. But now there is something new for squads, which is member overrides. And those member overrides allow you to override the assistant overrides for every single sub-assistant. Just imagine now, if you give a call, or if you do a call with create call, you can set assistant overrides, which allow you to define certain variables inside of that assistant that you can then replace directly inside of that assistant for a more nuanced conversation. Let's say you, for example, have a certain language set for the lead that you want to call before. You can adjust something like the model, you can adjust the transcriber, you can adjust the voice, all of that with an assistant override for the sub-assistant. Now the thing is, if you want to do something for all of the assistants, you would now have to do this manually for every single assistant in the JSON, which looping through it is always a big pain. So as lucky as we are, they introduced something called members overrides, which does the exact same thing as assistant overrides just with the difference that it applies it to all of the assistants. And this is important because the member overrides are basically prioritized even for the assistant overrides, meaning that if you set assistant overrides and member overrides, those member overrides will be prioritized, meaning your assistant overrides will be adjusted or will be added at the first position. And after that, the member overrides will override whatever is left or whatever they need to adjust or whatever we added to the member overrides. Now, I know this is a lot of theory, but you will get the gist of it. I made this thing via the create call setup, and you will also get access to this inside of the Postman setup. Because here I basically just defined a basic setup for you. I just have the members array. There's just a static assistant ID. That is the one that you basically selected. And we have defined the member overrides right here, which in my case just adjust the first message of every single assistant that you have inside of the squad to that standard or static first message right here. And it will also replace a variable value globally for the assistant or for the variable overrides to Yannis. Now there are some more fields defined that you definitely need for make this work in the first place, because you set this during a call. So whenever you basically start a call, you can send in those member overrides. And as you can imagine, you need to set a phone number ID or maybe the phone number if you want to add it temporarily. And you need to also define the customer number. Now, again, if you want to learn more about squads, I definitely recommend you to go into the documentation and learn under squads. Or if you're patient, you will see very soon a big tutorial on squads, because I believe it is incredibly powerful and we use it for massive projects inside of our agency. Now, the next feature we are going to come to that is not available inside of the dashboard is again for squads. This is the 5th feature, but it's not going to be the last, and this is for everyone that is still here. This feature about the squads is something that also has been newly introduced, and it's just not available as it's again more complex. But you will love it because it makes the transition between assistants inside of a squad a lot smoother. Now, to understand what it is, let's head down here to the squad section, and we're gonna go on update squad. And once it loaded, actually I just closed the playground window and went just through the straight documentation. And here in the update squad, all we do is we go down here to members, we open that up, and now you can see in the assistant destinations, if you open this part, you will find a new field called transfer mode, which is super cool and something we have been looking forward for a while, because what transfer mode allows you to do is it allows you to change the way the information of the system prompt is passed along for each separate squad member. Now imagine this, imagine you have a squad setup of 3 squad members. The first one is basically just to identify the inquiry of the call, and then it can route it either to a shipping assistant or to a product problem assistant. And this main assistant initially, let's say a user called, and he says, yeah, I have a problem with my product. Now in that case, the first assistant would transfer the call to the second assistant, to the product assistant, but it would retain and contain, just send over the initial system prompt as well. So you can imagine that the conversation that the AI will have access to, and that is in that case probably something for the chat completions, you will have the main system prompt, so the one of the initial assistant, then you have the conversation until then, and then you have the system prompt of the new assistant, so the one that you basically transferred it to, and from there the conversation continues. So you have access to both of the system prompts within the same conversations, which is great. So it is super great for increasing the quality of some of the calls if you have a smaller squad setup. But if you, for example, have dedicated assistants that don't necessarily need the system prompts from before, because you build the system prompts in a way that even a sub-assistant can act completely independently of the others, basically with its own kind of knowledge and system prompt. In that case, this mode is going to be awesome because it has a feature called swap system message in history. And what that does is it basically replaces the initial system message and doesn't append anything else. Now imagine the difference. You have a squad setup, the call comes in, and the first assistant transfers the call to the product assistant. You have now 2 system messages, which is not as optimal. Now, by swapping it to the swap system messages in history, you would still get the call in, the call is being transferred to product, but now the first system message of the beginning of the conversation is being replaced by the new system message of that assistant it has been transferred to. And then all of the conversation is being below that. Now, this increases quality a lot. And it also removes some of the hallucinations if you don't know how to properly set up your system prompts, because that is going to be crucial if you do multi-transfers during during a squad setup. Now, in order to set it up, I'm also just quickly guiding you through. All you do is you click on play. You have your setup right here with the update squad. Down here under members, you would just click on members. I think I already have all of them open. Let me just close them and start from scratch. Now once cleaned, it looks like this. So you have your member setups right here, which you can then click on. And down here in the optional properties, you go on assistant destinations. And in assistant destinations, we can now add more properties, which is the transfer mode. And this transfer mode, you set it then to swap system message in history if you don't want the sub-assistant to have access to the system prompt of the first one. And as you can see, it looks something like here, which I've also prepared for you inside of the Postman collection, which looks like this. So same thing, you basically just add your assistants and you can add your assistant destinations to your squad setup. And all you need to do is basically just set this key inside of your squad setup that you built with transient assistants, and you adjust it to swap system message in history if you want to get rid of the first system message in the first place. Now, yes, these have been definitely more advanced, but I believe they are so important, especially if you build out really complex assistants and squads. But trust me, if you do, this makes all the difference in the world by just getting the quality up and making sure you get the best experience for your voice assistant. Now, for everyone who's still here and not bored already by all of this complexity and technicalities, I have one more for you, which is like a little extra that I added to the documentation right here, which is more experimental, but it is something I would like to show you because I think it's really cool. The feature I'm going to show you basically allows you to have a multilingual setup inside of the orchestration layer as we know it now, without using real-time API. And the way this works is that it basically tries to identify the language in the beginning and then changes some of the settings during the call based on the language that comes in. Meaning that if you have English setup in the beginning, but someone starts speaking in Spanish, this setup tries to identify that it is Spanish and then changes the transcriber language to Spanish, and it also changes the voice, if it's not set already to multilingual, which it should, to a Spanish approach, right? And that is something that we've tried so far. It is nothing that I would say I would implement already in production, but it is cool to play around with, and I'd really like to see you taking advantage of that in some way, or maybe giving it a try yourself. Maybe you find a way on making this already better, because I believe this is a really cool feature that we could leverage in the future. And to get you just a bit of more details on how that works and how you can set it up, all we do is we basically just head over back to the assistant. I'm gonna go to the update assistant thing right here. And now here under the body parameters, all I'm going to do is I just scroll down here. If we go down in this big list of things, now to access this feature, all we do is I'm just gonna close quickly this playground. We're gonna look at it on the documentation first. So we go to assistants, update assistant. It's very easy to see there. We go down here to transcribers. We open transcribers. We go to deepgram, and in deepgram right here, you will find language detection enabled. So this is a feature that is set by deepgram. So deepgram basically tries to identify the language that is currently spoken, because deepgram is obviously the first point of contact during you speaking something and the technology stack receiving something. So they try to match the language, which kind of works, but not as good as I would like. And it is usually happening at the beginning of the conversation. That's at least from the experience that I had while trying it. And you can set this literally just to true. The thing is, when you update it, you need to set a couple of more things, because this setting alone is not enough for Vapi to just update it. You need to set some more things at the same time, which I have already taken care of for you, so I don't need to run through the plaything now. You will find this as well inside of my Postman collection, which looks like this. So those are all of the major fields you need to define in that way, and it's important that you keep them in a similar way, meaning you need to use deepgram and you need to use 11 Labs with their multilingual setup, because otherwise it might not work. Now, as you can see, since deepgram is involved in 11 Labs, you already know it's gonna be a little bit more expensive than when you use something like Cartesia, but it allows you to switch at least to some degree between a language inside of the orchestration layer. I've tried it, I have not been fully satisfied with it, but maybe you are. So feel free to just use that and update your assistant and give it a try, because I'm very curious to see if that actually works for you or not. Now, this whole thing has been a little bit more technical than expected, because I see that the documentation of Vapi is still a little bit hard to read, especially for beginners. But I hope those videos at least give you the glimpse of understanding that there is more to this whole setup than just the things you see inside of the dashboard, which I hope now you understand a bit better and can maybe even leverage already for your very own voice assistants. That's all I have for you today. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you have anything for me you'd like to ask, feel free to drop me a comment below. I would really like to see as well if you've already leveraged those features before. And that's all I'm gonna say for now. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate your time and see you next time.